Hi, Steve Draper here in my workshop in Bellevue, Nebraska. Thought we'd talk a little bit today about clamping action, about clamps. You'll say, what do you want to talk about clamps for? I've got a Shopsmith. Well, your Shopsmith uses clamping action for just about every adjustment that is made for it. For example, on your headstock, when you loosen the lock, slide it, and then lock it again, it stays in place because there's a clamp. Clamps around each of the tubes. How about on the table height adjustment? When you loosen this knob or tighten it, it creates a clamping action around the tube that keeps the table from going up and down. Over here on the extension table, we have a lock here, and what happens on it, it expands outwards so that there's a clamping action that happens around each of the tubes to keep it from going up and down. Now that works great on the Shopsmith because we're able to adjust and do all these wonderful operations we can do on the Shopsmith. And as long as we use the machine so that we're not putting undue stress on those clamps, it works great. But there's some times that you've used your Shopsmith and found out that you don't get the results exactly that you were hoping to get out of it. So let's look at a drill press here to start with. Here on your drill press, when we do operations drilling down, it puts force on that table. And this carriage, if we push hard enough down on this carriage, it'll move because the force that we're doing is in the same direction as the clamping action is trying to keep it from moving down. You've probably had the experience of drilling 6 holes, hoping they would all be the same depth. And when you get to the 6th one, it's just not as deep as what the first one was. What happened? This carriage shifted down on you, and the table right along with it. Well, to keep that from happening, you can do one of two things. We can put a spacer in here. And let the carriage rest right on that spacer. Now all the force, when it's exerted, goes straight through here, through the legs, down to the floor. And we're not putting any pressure on the clamp here that's on the carriage. The other option is just to have the carriage all the way down. Then you don't need a spacer at all. Of course, you would adjust the height of your motor to match, to go along with it. Now on your Shopsmith, when you do table saw operations, these teeth push the table down. Now, that's not a problem because the force is so small that the clamping action of the table height can hold that in place. It's not a problem. Also, it's not a problem creating undue force here on the motor because the clamping action is straight down through the motor through these tubes. So the force is not having to be opposed by the clamping action. So there's no problem doing that. Now, horizontal boring is a different story. When you're doing horizontal boring, you're creating forces against the side of this fence that are just extreme. So extreme that it's going to make that fence move, no matter how tight you tighten down this clamp. And I'll show you why. This piece right here is what's doing the clamping. It's only 3/16 inch wide thick by 2.5 inches long, which is less than a 1/2 square inch. Same thing on the opposite end. So some of you probably have made these tighter. And usually if you get them tighter, these are so hard to put on and off that it's just really uncomfortable and almost painful. So set these so that they are comfortable for you. Now, some like to use a C-clamp. I'll take a C-clamp and clamp down here on the back side. Maybe another one here on the front side. Hoping that that's going to keep that fence from moving when you do your horizontal boring. Well, I've done it that way, and it's still going to move. It still moves. You do this hard enough. So I'm going to show you today another way where you can get rid of those clamps and not have to use external clamps anymore when you're doing these type of operations. So what we want to do is we want to set up the machine so the force that's holding the stock from moving when I advance this is not the fence. I want to have the table itself be what is holding it from moving. And you notice we have the main table butted right up against the extension table, which has got all the support we need to keep this from going this way in any fashion whatsoever. But now how are we going to hold the stock? Well, you'll get a piece of 3/4 inch plywood. It needs to be plywood because those are sized about a 32nd of an inch less than 3/4, which is exactly what you need for that table slot right there. So now, when you do your horizontal boring, the force is going to be exerted to here and now straight to the table because it's firmly in that slot. Now, we don't want this to be tilting over, so we will put the fence against it only to keep it from tilting. The actual force itself is being absorbed right here in the table. You get no shift, no movement whatsoever in this fence when you do it this way. Now, that'll get you for stock that's less than 3 inches, but we can do stock any width we need to because we can use the other slot in the table for wider stock. So as I have it here, of course now, most people that are doing horizontal boring, they're not doing any more deeper than about an inch when they're advancing that quill. In fact, let's just set this for an inch here. Okay. That's about 1.1/8 right there. I've got that set for. So most people are not going to advance it much more than that when they're doing their horizontal boring. As you see here it is now, I can do, if the stock were 11 inches, I could do it. You say, well, what if I want to do 10 inches or 9 inches? Just move this. stock doesn't have to be hanging over the edge here to do horizontal boring. We can do it here. So we can move that in, we can still advance that and do it. Okay, so that's going to get a stock up to there. How do I get other width stocks? Easy. Have yourself a 2-inch wide and a 3-inch wide piece of plywood or MDF. Use them for your spacers. Other widths that you may be putting in there. This one here, it's about 5.5. I can easily do 5.5 here with that spacer. Or if I want it out a little further or closer to the edge, I can use both of them. Or I can just use this one for other stock. So with these 3 pieces here, your plywood to go into the slot and these 2 spacers, you can do any size you want here up to 11. Well, what if you want to do something wider than 11? Easy peasy. Just take your floating extension table, add her on here, and now you can do up to whatever width you want to on the Shopsmith. Now, some of you say, well, what about when I want to do end grain into the end of a piece of stock, like into here? So as you can see here, this will work fine here for this length of stock. And of course I would use my miter gauge to keep it square. So I can easily do my end grain here, and of course have a support here, but I have something longer, okay? Well, again, if you have something longer, we can put some extension floating tables in here to get it even longer. So there's a way to do this properly and not have your fence work, and this is it. Thanks for watching. Steve Draper, Bellevue.